Hey guys, my name is Eric. Like he mentioned, I'm a principal security consultant at SecureWorks, and I primarily focus on Wi-Fi. And I'm here as a part of the Wireless Village, so I strongly suggest you guys just go check it out and see what they have going. They have a good CTF going on too. So today I'm going to be talking to you about hunting and tracking rogue radio frequencies. I'm not going to jump right into that because first I have to put a little bit of fear of God into you. So I'll talk about that quick story that I was mentioning to him. $60 of hardware from Amazon, from an employee cafeteria or the parking lot. I was able to steal 10 years worth of R&D from a large company, and they're a large Fortune company. And so with just $60, somebody like me with just the right skill set can take what's probably worth millions and millions of dollars. And so I'll talk about what you see on the screen. That's just a little lipstick 5-volt battery. That's powering a Raspberry Pi. Now, a lot of people make fun of me for my love of Raspberry Pis, but they run my chicken coop, and they can also break into companies, so I really like them. And then maybe a $15 wireless adapter. And basically, this hardware altogether, I can control from my phone. So I might just look like some nerd or dweeb, sitting there with my backpack, but that's what I'm looking at on my phone. I'm not on Pinterest. I'm not on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that. I'm actually breaking into your network from there. And to make matters even worse, there's a remote VPN connection from that device going back to the rest of my cohort, the rest of my pen testers at my company. And so you can just see, hey, this is a normal Linux computer that's running in my pocket right now. So there's some questions to ask yourself when you're talking about wireless and wireless security. One of them is, does your company allow somebody to bring their own device? Do they allow, hey, you can bring your own iPhone to use your own email, or do they give you your own? What we found is that a lot of the times when a user can bring whatever device they want to in the network, that really it's not secure because that user can click on pop-ups, that user will accept a certificate if it's issued to them, and oftentimes they're vulnerable to clicking on a rogue access point or some kind of active portal that they might give up their credentials for. And so this is one of these questions that if you manage this for your company, or if you're at all involved in a security role, you should really ask, hey, is it worth it to bring for people to bring their own device and maybe put them on the corporate network? They should really be segmented if they have to bring them at all. Another question is, for a lot of smaller companies, sometimes there's just a normal WPA2 PSK network. All that means is it's like typically your home internet connection where you type in a password and anybody else that wants to join your Wi-Fi, hey, they just need the same password. Well, the problem with that is if you fire someone, they know what that password is. Are you going to have to swap your password or change your password every single time that you fire somebody or that you maybe let somebody go? And there's no way to track users on this. Or I shouldn't say, there's not a good way to track what users authenticate and which ones don't. You can only see devices. So this is one of the things to keep a watch out for. And a lot of people will use this for, say, like a guest network, or they'll use it for some other network that they maybe don't think is that critical. But shared passwords are a problem because they get posted on the internet, and that can be a way, or it has been a way that I've at least been able to get into some networks, is just, hey, I'll Google the company and say, hey, what's their Wi-Fi password? And sure enough, someone on Yelp will post their wireless password that they were in their conference room. It sounds crazy, but how many of you have seen a posted wireless password in some conference room and anywhere that you've been? Yeah, OK. I think it's probably all of you, but we'll just go with that. The other one that's really fun is guest Wi-Fi. So how many people have connected to like a guest Wi-Fi network, and then all of a sudden, oh, you connect to it, and it's asking for username and password, or like what's your room number, what's your last name, all of these things. Well, really, with a guest network, there's really no way for you that's connecting to it to know that that's not an attacker's device. So that's one of my favorite tricks, is I'll stand up a rogue access point that maybe acts as a guest network. And when somebody puts in their username and password, well, hey, now it's mine. I don't even need to crack it. I don't need to beat them with a wrench to get it out of them. All I need to do is just, hey, they click on it, it goes away, and now I have their username and password, and they're none the wiser. This is one of my favorites, especially because it puts people in hot water when something happens to it. So there's a lot of companies, and there's all these dumb security controls. Why do we need those? But then you have your friendly friend, you have your friendly IT guy that brings in a bootleg Wi-Fi. So they just plug in a router into the normal internet connection, and now everybody has like this office Wi-Fi that only they can access, that IT doesn't know about or they can't touch. I love to break into those because when you break into them, boom, it puts me directly on the corporate network, nothing segmented, and those are a real problem. And really, the IT staff, unless they really know what's in their wireless airspace, there's really no way to defend against it. So why are wireless attacks, useful for an attacker? Why do I look for them as opposed to some of the other ways like phishing that you could get in? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but this is my favorite one because you see this, this building, right? There's all these security controls, cameras, locks, all these things that I would have to break into in order to get access to a computer network to be able to jack in. It's easier for me to stay on the park bench across the street with an antenna, and I can stay anonymous, out of sight. I never get picked up on a security camera. Nobody even knows that I'm there. It's not suspicious at all, right? And so that's personally why I like it, because with a good, I've done pen tests where I've been staying in an adjacent hotel to where the building is, and I can do the pen test straight from my hotel room because I have a long-range antenna. And so this is one of the reasons why attackers really like wireless as an attack vector, because there's no physical proximity. You don't have to actually, try and badge in anywhere. You don't have to try and get access. You don't have to try and, look the part or try and break in that way. It's, hey, you're just sitting on a park bench. You're another guy. You're another, kid like me on a cell phone, just hanging out. So I'm going to go over an overview of some of the wireless attacks that are out there. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but it's ones that I've done some damage with that I really like to use, and I think they're kind of fun. And so really the whole point of this is me going into why it's important to track and find where there's rogue signals or spurious Wi-Fi signals coming out, because these are all the things that somebody can do with rogue Wi-Fi or just rogue radio in general. So here's a brief outline. There's wireless phishing. I already mentioned that, with guest credentials, somebody just typing them and giving them to me. I can also collect device metadata. So just because I'm maybe not connected to a network doesn't mean that a device doesn't give off information that, that I can determine some things about. I can also track people with it. There's going to be a great demo in the Wireless Village where they can track some AirPods. And so if you know somebody's basically, hey, that person has these AirPods, you can use that and identify them and track them and see where they go. So if you're following somebody, if you have a physical target that you're going after, it's a really easy way to track somebody down. Another thing is you can jam an alarm system. So say I do want to break into a building. If I use a radio signal to jam the alarm system, that's not the thing in movies. It's a possibility, that I jam it and then the alarm might be screaming, hey, there's motion, somebody's trying to break in. But really what's happening is it's screaming and no one can hear it. The base station alarm that's going to send a signal out to 911 or send off a siren, that doesn't go out if it's all wireless. And same thing, we'll talk about some of the attacks that you can do against opening security gates or garage doors and how like those roll jam attacks or those replay attacks kind of work. And then maybe we'll cover some wireless medical devices if we have time. So what is a rogue access point? I have to talk to clients about this all the time. And now I'll probably just reference this RSA video as like, hey, if you want to see something about a rogue access point, this is my whole spiel on it. We can save some time this way. A rogue access point is really any access point that's not in your control. So if you're a CISO, CTO, or somebody that just does network security, a rogue access point is just an access point that somebody can stand up on their phone. It could be a hotspot. It's any access point that's in your airspace that you don't control. That is technically rogue. And so, yeah, I mean, everybody has a phone now that can go into some kind of hotspot mode. So technically, everybody in your company could have a rogue AP. But I'm going to discuss really why those don't matter so much and how it kind of matters what you're looking for in terms of an actual rogue access point. And I'll show you some of the dangers of them and what they can actually do. So this is an example of one of the tools that I use. I think this is Wi-Fi Fisher. Yeah, it's Wi-Fi Fisher. And this is me setting up a trap for a user. And so what you're seeing on this screen is me just running this. Again, this is all from my phone, running on the device. Let's see if I have it in my pocket. It's just running on this tiny little device. Like, I mean, this is $60 off Amazon, and I'm connected to it on my cell phone. Like, this is nothing, and this could be stealing wireless signals from you guys. And so what you're seeing is, hey, a user is connected to this, and they're trying to access the internet. They're trying to see what the weather is. Their apps are trying to do all this different stuff. And really what it does is it pops up a nice little captive portal. And so this screen, does this look familiar to anybody? Hey, you don't have internet, right? And it says, oh, I want to connect automatically. Well, you see on the next screen, oh, well, you just have to type in your key. This web page that you're looking at, though, right there, that's actually my web page. And that isn't the Windows 10 login to put in your credentials. That's actually my web page. So I don't have to crack a password. I don't have to do anything. You're just going to give me your wireless key, and I'm going to walk away with a plain text wireless key, which is awesome because it makes my job a lot easier. Because now I'm just going to impersonate you and your device on the network, and I really didn't have to do anything but have $60 worth of hardware in a parking lot. And so what can rogue access points really do? Well, like I showed you, you can steal credentials. If there's a compromised workstation, I can use that to hop back into somewhere else on the network. They can be used just to exfiltrate data. If I'm stealing terabytes and terabytes of information, somebody's probably going to notice that if their switches and routers are just fully pegged the entire time. But if I can stand up a rogue access point and connect to somewhere else via long-range antenna, I can exfiltrate as much data as I want, and that's going to go under the radar of most security controls that are out there. Just because, hey, this isn't their network. Why are they monitoring it? Well, it's mine, and I'm getting all your data out of your company so you don't notice me. And the other one that really happens, and this kind of goes back to that bootleg Wi-Fi, is it allows users to circumnavigate corporate policies. Nobody wants to put in their credentials over and over. It always asks for them. You just want internet for your iPad, so what are they going to do? They're going to try and circumnavigate however they can the policies that are put in place by the CTO, by the security officer, or whoever in their company organizes that. So wireless devices, they emit a ton of usable information. Even if you're not connected to the network, you can still see a ton of information about it. So like I was mentioning, you can track a user absolutely no problem at all. You can see that, hey, this is my iPhone, and my iPhone, it's trying to connect to some other wireless access point, and I can see the unique identifier from that iPhone, as I'll show you here in the next slide. And from that, I can basically just see, hey, this is that user, and this is where they're going. I could follow, if I knew, that you had your phone, then I could follow that phone everywhere. So I could follow you, maybe to your car and see, hey, can I steal a laptop out of their car? Again, these are advanced tactics that people use, but it's all a possibility, and it should be known that this is something that you can do. And you can also identify the device type. So each device has a MAC address on the network, right? And that MAC address is public. Just for anything in the air. If you have your phone, if you have Wi-Fi on right now, there's a MAC address for your Bluetooth, and there's a MAC address for Wi-Fi, and you connecting to any Wi-Fi or even just having it on will display that MAC address, and that can be used to identify the device type. And so the first 3 octet, or I guess 6 octets in a MAC address, that is determined and that is locked into the manufacturer of that device. So what does that get you? You might think like, oh, cool, you can find a bunch of iPhones, a bunch of Android devices, like, no big deal. But really, if you're looking for a way to get onto the network, if you're looking for a way to pivot into a device, into the rest of the network, it really does help to know, hey, is this a company that uses only MacBooks? Is this a company that only uses a certain type of, maybe they only use Chromebooks? And so from those device identifiers, you can really get a ton of information, excuse me, that you can use later on. And you can also see what networks is everybody connected to. So maybe I can't identify your name exactly, but I can see that, hey, all of these Apple devices, they all join this mobile network. And all of these IoT devices, they join this network. And these laptops, they join the corporate network. Well, you can then know these types of devices are joining the corporate network, and maybe my goal as an attacker is to get onto that corporate network. And so that's what you do, is you can use all of this information, again, that anybody can read on a cell phone from $60 of hardware, from Amazon. And really what that gets you is a wealth of information that honestly is really useful when you're trying to break in somewhere. So let's take a quick look at one of the screens that I was talking about. This is from a tool called AirDump NG. It's a Linux tool. So what you can see here is the BSSID. That is that's like your access point. That's like if you're at home and you have like a Comcast box or whatever. That's the identifier of that device, that BSSID. And then there's the ESSID. That's basically just the name of your network. It's like Eric's home network would be the name of it, an example one. And so you can see, hey, look down lower, that 18B430, that is a device that's connected to that home network. So now you know that device is connected to Eric's home network, and we have both of those unique identifiers. Great. It all looks like jumbles and strings, but thanks to the magic of Google, we know that's actually a Nest thermostat. And what does that get you? Hey, maybe you've seen somewhere out there that like Nest is vulnerable to X, Y, and Z. Well, now you have a little bit more information. Maybe you can use that Nest connection or that IoT device to connect into the rest of the network. Maybe you can trick that device to automatically connect to you. So really, as an attacker, you're not looking for the golden key to get in the first time. You're just looking for any chink in the armor, any usable information that you can use to then continually pivot and lather, rinse, repeat until you get something that your target or what you're going for. And really, you could just set something like, again, you could just set one of these devices, plug it in the back of somebody's computer, has power forever, just plug it into a surge protector. No one's going to know that it's there. It's so small. And you could just leave something there logging all of this information for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, come back, collect it at some other point in time, and now you have a treasure trove of data to go through and mine and see, hey, when do users come and go? You can log what devices connect to the network when. You can see, hey, is there a conference in town? Because look at all of these new devices connecting to this network. So just, again, one of these little devices, one little rogue access point, one little logger can collect a wealth of information that any attacker would love to have. So let's talk a little bit about tracking people and devices. I won't spend a ton of time off of this, but it is really interesting. So I mentioned that you can use some form of trilateration basically to find the exact location of where somebody is if you're within some kind of physical proximity to them. The Wireless Village does a game on this called Fox and Hound. That's how I got into all this wireless stuff. Is I thought it was really cool that somebody would have like one of those little hotspots. They put it in their pocket, and your goal, or my goal at the time, was to go find them in the entire conference and find who is that one person. And so what you'd have to do is try and track that person based upon their hotspot. And at a conference like RSA, at a conference like DEF CON, there's 30,000 people there. It's a little bit difficult of a task. And so that's one of the games that they're putting on. And so you can do this from an Android device. You can do it from pretty much any device that you have. And it's really easy to get involved in and check it out. But really what that's doing is teaching you how to track somebody, teaching you how to track a rogue signal. And especially one that's on the move. It's not one that's static and doesn't move. And then there's another tool called Blue Sonar. Now this is something that, again, they'll demo in the Wireless Village later. But basically what this tool does is you cannot be paired to anything. Your Bluetooth just has to be on whatever your device is, whether it's AirPods, your iPhone XS, QZY, your brand new Pixel, your iPad. If it has Bluetooth on, hey, no big deal. They can just send one request out into the air. They don't have to connect to your device. And the Bluetooth signal will respond back with, hey, here's my power. Here's my signal strength. What does that get you? You're probably asking. If you know the power relative to where you are, you can use that as a form of distance measurement to say, hey, that means they're probably this close to me. And you can use that to pretty easily track somebody if you know what their device identifier is. And so again, this is kind of showing that, hey, you can see the station ID, and you can also see the device that they're connected to. Now let's talk a little bit about replay attacks. So there are a lot of attacks past Wi-Fi. Wireless is anywhere. If it's not plugged in via some kind of a cable, there's some way, shape, or form that it's wirelessly connected to the world. And so two common things that you'll see is replay attacks and jamming. Replay attacks, it's really common in cheaper electronics that don't have any kind of encryption or any kind of protections on them. And this basically, it just allows an attacker to send a signal again. So for example, this clicker for example, if I click this next, whatever, it sends a wireless signal saying, hey, go to the next slide. Well, if you were to have a listening device and capture that, well, you could then just play it back. And if you played it back, the receiver is going to see the same thing. The receiver is going to see, hey, Eric must have wanted to have clicked it, except I didn't click anything. That was somebody else. And so that's all a replay attack is they can basically now control that same button. What can you use this in? Garage doors, security gates, pretty much anywhere you have like a little clicker like this, those replay attacks are incredibly common. Just because, hey, it's cheap. They don't have to have a ton of engineers to get cryptography. There's no kind of rolling code. And so there's a ton of uses for it. And you think like, well, that's dumb. Why is that a thing? Again, because there's really not a big vector, or there's a very large vector for it. But there's not a lot of documented attacks of it happening. But it's definitely ways that we've gotten in somewhere. Then there's jamming. All this is you're probably familiar with, like, say there's music playing somewhere. I'm just going to play louder music so that they can't even hear that speaker. That's all that jamming is you're just introducing, RF noise so that somebody can't hear what they're supposed to hear. And so why might that seem useful to just be really annoying to everybody? Well, other than that, if you have, two wireless devices that are security devices and and it's critical that they talk to one another, if you can introduce RF, noise in there, static in there, to where they can't communicate, well, now if something happens to one, it can't communicate that to the other one. And that's the case for a lot of security devices. There's a lot of medical devices that operate that way. And there's also a lot of security systems that, if they're not designed properly, work that way too. A lot of common like security sensors, like wireless security sensors, say you were to open a door, for example. If you open that door, it sends a little wireless signal to your whatever the base station is saying, hey, that door opened. If that was supposed to trigger an alarm, well, if I create a lot of noise and that signal tries to go out to the base station, but the base station can't hear it because there's too much noise introduced, well, it doesn't know that it opened, the alarm won't go off, and everything seems hunky-dory. And so that's one of the ways that jamming, other than just being super annoying, can actually be used to break in anywhere. I don't know if this will work. We'll just see. So this is an example of a really nice neighborhood that my uncle lives in, and me, again, with this $60 piece of hardware, opening it because I cloned one of the clickers that somebody's going by. I don't know if it's going to work, though. Oh, snap, it worked. So what you can see here, I'm on my phone. That's the little Raspberry Pi sitting on the console, and I just clicked a button, and now I can open that security gate. But now imagine that's to maybe a secure facility. Maybe that's into some underground parking. Maybe that's somewhere that I shouldn't be. I just had to wait for somebody to go through. I capture their signal as they click it. Hey, now I'm in. I'm essentially them, and I can get somewhere and give me a little bit more access than I had. Now, this isn't a badge to get into a building, but hey, if a security guard sees you and he's like, oh, they're coming up for underground parking, there's already that level of trust of, hey, since they came from this direction, that was a secure area. And so there's those levels of trust that you can start to break down and erode from there. And so this is an example of an incredibly cheap alarm system, but it demonstrates what wireless noise can do. And I'll kind of try and narrate this as it goes. So let's see, it's going to play. So right now you can see, hey, motion went and that alarm went off, right? And now you're going to see that little red light go off, and now the alarm didn't because I'm running a jamming interference on there. And so that end alarm, say that's used to block a hallway, block a driveway to see, hey, is there motion here? It's been blocked effectively, and now somebody could sneak up, somebody could break into an area that they're not supposed to be. All right, so you've seen a ton of these wireless attacks in action. And my goal of that was not to completely terrify you, but at least just show you some of the reasons why it matters, why you should look at this, why why somebody like me does it, like what's in it for me as an attacker. Now, I do it to help companies. I tell them, hey, this is how you're broken. Somebody could do this to actually try and steal money, steal intellectual property. There's tons of reasons why somebody would want to do it. But I show you all those just so you can see, hey, there is an importance here. This isn't just like, oh, look at this nerd that can do cool stuff with stuff he bought off Amazon. Like, that's not the point. The point is to show you how accessible it is for anybody who wants to watch YouTube to do this. And so now I'll kind of dig into a little bit of the more technical aspects of it, of digging actually into radio frequencies and RF. Because in order to triangulate, trilaterate, and find a rogue radio signal, you have to know how radio signals work and propagate. They're all a little bit different. So I'll give you the quick 101 of this, and hopefully it's not too mathy, but we'll get into it. So there's frequency ranges. You guys have probably heard Wi-Fi is 2.4 gigahertz. What is a gigahertz? 1 hertz is just 1 cycle a second. So you can think of it as one wave. If you're looking at the ocean, that's one wave going right by you in that 1 second of time. So the higher frequency, when you hear of like, oh, what's HF or high frequency radio waves, that just means more cycles. That means there's more waves compressed into that time. And then same thing, lower frequency, it just means that, hey, there's less actual waves coming in at that point in time. And so when you hear gigahertz, that just means, so giga is just the prefix for billion. So that's 2.4 billion waves a second are going by. And so when you hear the terms hertz, gigahertz, megahertz, and all those things, those are just talking about the type of frequency that it is, and if it's a longer frequency, if it's a lower frequency, or if it's a higher frequency, depending on how much those are compressed. And so that doesn't really help. I'm a visual learner anyways, so I found this neat little diagram online, so you can kind of see, hey, there's you can see at 3 kilohertz, this is what they use, this very low frequency. It's like what submarines use to communicate. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you see 30 gigahertz, 300 gigahertz, and this is used for, like space communications. And so all of these radio waves have different properties, which makes them used for different things and different reasons. So again, like in this diagram, you'd have 2.4 gigahertz, so to the far right of the spectrum. That's going to be your Wi-Fi. That's going to be your phones. That's going to be those devices. And it's funny because microwaves also operate on a very similar band to Wi-Fi. So if you ever have Wi-Fi knockout in your house, anytime somebody heats something up, you should get a new microwave because it means it's having some, it's introducing some radio noise. It's not properly shielded. But this is just a good representation that when I say, hey, something is 3 megahertz, what does that really mean? 3 megahertz is 3 million cycles per second. So that's what that wave looks like. And again, I'll go into how that really matters because you could nerd out all day looking at all the different spectrums and things that are out there, but really they have different properties, which are kind of important to know. So low frequencies, they can diffract basically. They can bend around objects. So maybe they're not going to transmit as much data, but they can go longer range. Very low frequencies, they can penetrate really deep. Again, that's kind of why submarines use them. Then you have stuff like medium wave, short wave. They can bounce off of things. So like if you're a ham radio operator, you can use those types of frequencies to actually bounce off of the ionosphere and bounce back down. That means these waves are going to propagate everywhere. Now, if a wave penetrates and you send it off into space, it's going to go completely out there. But if you have a type of radio frequency that bounces off of the atmosphere, hey, that's great because you can communicate globally without needing a satellite or any other kind of base station. And then you have really, really high frequencies. And those get absorbed pretty quickly because there's so much of them, so many of them compressed into a small area. And so, for example, if you were to just take Wi-Fi for an example, there's 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz that are really common. 2.4 gigahertz is slower, but it goes farther, it penetrates deeper. 5 gigahertz is much faster, but it doesn't have quite the range. And so that's why you haven't seen 2.4 gigahertz really go away when 5 gigahertz started getting put into things. Is really just because of the different properties that introduces. And like I was talking about, different radio frequencies have different capabilities. And depending on that, there's different uses for them, right? And the same uses that maybe an engineer wants to design something for are the same things that an attacker can use to leverage. So say I wanted to transmit a lot of data really quickly over a short distance, I might just use typical 5G, like 5G internet Wi-Fi because it's pretty fast and I don't need to be, I don't need to be very far away from it. Now, say I needed to be really far away, I could put in a very, low frequency device that I could pick up from a very, very long distance away if maybe my target was somewhere, that I couldn't have a lot of access to. And so that'd be some of the reasons of why I would use one over the other, or why an attacker at least would. And again, hey, I can use it to exfiltrate data. I can use it to track a person. And sometimes you can even use it to eavesdrop on communications if those communications aren't encrypted and you can just listen in. All right, so let's talk about one of my pet peeves. And there's just a little bit more math and science, and then I promise it'll all kind of wrap up and seem to make a little bit more sense. So everybody says, like, oh, we're going to triangulate you. When really what they're talking about is trilateration. Trilateration uses distance, and triangulation uses angles, triangle, right? And so I'll just hopefully identify and like explain these without using too much math and using a quick story about it. So say you have 3 people and a loud boom goes off in the center of town, right? They're all going to look in that same direction, right? And this is triangulation because everybody's going to look in the direction that they heard the noise coming from, right? And then there's an angle that forms. And if you do some fancy math involved with it, you can basically say, okay, if everybody's looking where everybody, intersects, so if something, a balloon popped between you and me, we'd both look where that balloon was. And if you have a bunch of people all looking at that same spot, a bunch of, listening posts all listening for that signal, if you have a bunch of people looking for it, you can, where those intersect, that's typically where that sound, that noise, that RF came from. I don't know what that was. Somebody, I think it was probably Wireless Village. That's probably what it was from. And so if you drew lines in the direction where from everybody's perspective, where they all cross, that's where the source would be. And that's triangulation. And that gets a little bit confused with trilateration, which is important if you're actually trying to track somebody down. Because like when I'm doing like rogue fox hunting or trying to find a rogue access point, I'm not using triangulation. I'm not like doing some math with some angles and saying like with a compass, like, oh, well, it looks like they're, 358 degrees north of northwest kind of a deal. What I'm really doing is I'm looking for power levels. And so that's what trilateration is. And it works on signal strength and distance. And so I think this is a little bit intuitive with everybody who's ever, like walked around, looking for a cell phone signal. Hey, you're looking for bars on your phone. The closer that you get to it, the more bars you have, the stronger your signal is. And you can use that basically to find a rogue frequency by saying, hey, if the signal is really strong, you're getting close to it. It's the classic game of hot and cold, right? Now, if you have, the problem is with that is that if you are just in one spot and say you have 2 bars of cell phone coverage, right? Or in this case, I guess 3 bars. Really, it could be anywhere in a circle around you. You don't know where it's stronger if you can't move. You just say, hey, I know that I have 3 bars right here, and that's about all I know. So it could be, a known distance from you is where it's going to be. And same thing goes if you're, in that single spot, you only know how far away something is in a circle around you. And you don't really have much more information. Now, if you have 2 circles, if you have 2 people, you can say, hey, Fred, how's the signal strength over there? And then they can talk back and forth, and you can say, okay, well, I think it's about 100 feet, and you think it's about 100 feet. Well, if we drew 2 circles of 100 feet around us, well, there's 2 possible spots that you can find somebody, right? And so where that overlaps, that's where that signal could be coming from. But that's only 2 spots, which doesn't really get you a whole lot, especially if, this is in a crazy busy, this is a perfect environment, like if you're in a lab. This is not like the chaoticness that is multiple stories, multiple people, different, where different types of refraction, where signals are bouncing off or getting absorbed. This is a perfect environment. And now, with 3 detectors, that's really the minimum. And so when people think like, oh, we need 3 different, whatevers to like triangulate, it's really trilateration is what they're doing, because where all 3 of those circles overlap, that's where that device is most likely coming from. And now the more detectors, the more like listening posts that you have, the more accurate that you can get, because you can use them, to see, hey, are signals bouncing off? You can use them to, maybe cross-check one another. Really, you're adding redundancy and you're adding accuracy when you add more detectors. And this seems like, oh man, Eric, like where is he going with this? But really, most of the commercially available devices out there, they can look for rogue access points that pop up. They can tell you that, hey, if you're running, I don't want to be I'm going to be brand agnostic here and just say that a lot of devices, if you just say, hey, I want to detect near neighbors or near access points, well, you can, your access point will say, hey, this is the wireless network that I've seen. And if you run any sort of corporate environment that has multiple little access point disks up in the ceiling, like as you walk around and you see, the Wi-Fi that they have available, each of those are also information collectors. And so really all you have to do as a security person is to configure them to collect all that data back to a central spot. And if you know where each of your access points are, which you should, then you can basically use that to say, well, now I know the signal strength of where this device popped up. So that's one of those things that you really typically don't need to buy anything to already do this when it comes to Wi-Fi. So, all right, let's just go into the basics of how can you protect yourself? Because, I spew a lot of gloom and doom, but really at the end of the day, whether it's to my family, whether it's to, companies that I work with, my goal is to solve these security problems, or at least give advice of, hey, how do you protect yourself against this, right? And so know your RF environment, Look at your phone every now and then. Look at the tools that you already have and say, hey, this wireless access point doesn't belong. Or, hey, this wireless name looks a little bit fishy. It looks kind of close to ours, but isn't really something that matches our scheme. Have a logging solution in place. There are a bunch of devices that they create so much information and that it doesn't get logged anywhere. It just goes away. So if your access points, if your wireless solution has the ability to log and to log somewhere else, do it, look at it, and be able to tell from one week to the other week, hey, what's changed here? What's different? What's in this airspace? What am I looking for? And then see if your existing hardware has something called WIDs and WIPs. And what that basically means is that if you guys are from the network side, there's IDS and IPS, so intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. And basically, the intrusion detection just says, hey, somebody's doing something bad, you need to address it. Intrusion prevention, they basically say, hey, we're going to perform offensive attacks or some kind of defense attack, that we're going to change some configuration to basically react to what's happening. And there's a lot of existing hardware that already has this in it. You just need to Google it, figure out what the correct marketing term is for it, and see if you can implement it and just try and roll it out. Because again, if you already have access to it, you don't need more budget. All you need is more time just to figure out what's there to be able to at least put more protections in place. And now tracking down rogue access points. I feel like every time I go on a wireless engagement, everybody's like, oh, we want you to track down all of our rogue access points. If you can't tell me what all of the MAC addresses are for your rogue access points, or for all of your access points that you have in place, there's really no point in me looking for a rogue access point because you can't tell me if it's yours or not. So you need to know what your access points actually are, what their hardware identifiers are. And a lot of this hardware, if you have any kind of scalable solution for Wi-Fi, that's all available in some config somewhere. And just look at that. And then when you have somebody like me going for a wireless pen test, then basically what happens is I can say, oh, I can look for rogue access points because I know which ones actually belong to you. And I can't tell you how many times that I've stood up a rogue access point with a MAC address of 11223344, and nobody even notices. That should be a dead giveaway somewhere that something nefarious is going on. And really, just know what you're looking for. If I'm an attacker and I'm going to stand up a rogue access point, have employees be on the alert. I like to gamify things, right? And so an example of like, hey, if you stand up a rogue access point and an employee notices, give them a $20 Starbucks card or Amazon card, right? Incentivize security behavior. Because if they're on the alert and they're like, oh, maybe this is like one of the things that Eric's doing, and they actually uncover a real rogue access point, think of the amount of money that saved your company. A couple, $20 Amazon gift cards or Starbucks gift cards, to have everybody on super high security alert. It seems like a no-brainer to me. And so this is a rogue access point that I actually found in the wild, like on a client site. Normally, I blow a lot of hot air when it's like, oh, rogue access points, like, they're really not that big of a deal, or they're different than how people view them. But this is one that I actually found somebody had plugged in, and they're using it as bootleg Wi-Fi, and the customer had no idea that it was there, and I used it to pivot into their corporate network. So they're definitely a thing that you should be worried about and at least be looking for. And honestly, a lot of people just don't even look, and that's what it comes down to. So really, again, I'm not going to be any kind of brand agnostic, or I'm going to be brand agnostic here. There's tons of wireless providers out there. If you go to the Wireless Village, I'm sure they'll have recommendations for you, but I don't want to be up here spewing like, oh, everybody needs to buy this or everybody needs to buy that. There's pros and cons to literally every solution that's out there. And you have to find the solution that's unique to your organization. So we talked about WIDs and WIPs, wireless intrusion prevention system and intrusion detection system. And really what these can do is they can detect when I perform other kind of Wi-Fi attacks that maybe would kick somebody off the network, or if I'm standing up a rogue access point. A lot of these solutions, like, so say you're interested in vendor XYZ, or you're out on the floor maybe and you're talking to somebody, ask if they have this. Ask what the actual marketing name is for this, because every vendor has a little bit different of a name. It's not going to be WIDs and WIPs in the configuration or in your menus. You're going to have to ask them what it is. And a simple Google search, I guarantee you could find it on the first search. But really, it's important just to see, hey, what works best for your needs. If you're a small mom and pop shop that maybe has two access points, that's a lot different than if you're a multi-state, multinational company that's across the globe and you're trying to manage that. There's two completely different ends of the spectrum there. But really, what it comes down to is I can't come up here and tout one thing or the other, because really I don't know. I'm not you. I'm not the security person in your company. I can't tell you what's going to work best. You might have a bunch of users that use iPads, and that works better with one type of vendor, or you might have a whole bunch of users that are using all IoT devices or all a certain type of laptop. I can't really speak to that, and so that's why it's up to you guys to basically take this information and use that to make changes within your organization. Let's see. I already went over that. Oh, I just went back one. So now, this is another note on wireless penetration. So everybody stands up Wi-Fi, and then they get nervous, like, oh man, my Wi-Fi is extending, maybe across the street. Maybe it's extending into Starbucks. Well, really, it's one of those things that your Wi-Fi should be secure, because the distance that your Wi-Fi extends past your building is relative. If somebody's on an iPhone and maybe they can stand outside and still get your signal, but maybe they can't go across the street, then you think, oh, well, our Wi-Fi only extends past, like just right on our sidewalk, and maybe that's perfect. But really, if I'm an attacker who really wants, to get into your company, I'm going to get a long-range antenna and be able to access your Wi-Fi from, hundreds of yards away if possible. And so if you get, again, $50 worth of antennas on eBay, you could easily get your Wi-Fi from super, super far away. And then the farther you want to go, you can get dish antennas and more specialty antennas that can go even further. And so you really shouldn't have your wireless network rely on distance for security. Your wireless network should be secure because that's how you designed it. You shouldn't have to rely on the fact that, well, I know that it can't really leave the basement, because that's a bad recipe to have somebody like me or somebody worse than me who's looking to do something nefarious get into your company from Wi-Fi. And so this is an example of like a wireless heat map of driving around, and I can see, hey, can you guess where the access point is there on that map? It's it's directly obviously where it's hot. It's a heat map. And a lot of tools will build something out like this for you, so you can say, hey, this is the area most likely, which is way easier to search from multiple floors, multiple buildings, if you have some kind of a map to go off of. So here's kind of my breakdown, because, again, I verbally vomited a lot, and there's a lot of information on here. I'm sure you could go look this up online later if you want to, but really this is the takeaway. Is in the next week, just see what protections you already have in place. Just look at what security you have in place. See what your current configurations are. It's one of those things that like you should just mark on your calendar once a quarter. Hey, just take a look. See what's there. See how things have been configured. Stand up your own rogue access point. It could just be on a hotspot. See if anybody in your company even notices. My guess is that they probably won't. And now identify all of your known wireless networks. So if you have maybe 5 networks, and you want to identify like, hey, these are the ones that are there, just know what those are. Be able to have a list, be able to have some kind of Excel document that, that says, hey, we have, this many access points on here. It's really just basic organization. In the next 90 days, you should really be able to identify all of your access points across all of your sites. So be able to say, yes, that's ours, yes, that's ours. Have a list of MAC addresses that you can say, hey, this is just the general inventory of what we have, so that if somebody says, hey, Eric, what is this right here? I can be like, well, that's not one of ours. We should go look at that. Versus like, I don't know. Sorry, I have zero idea what that is. And again, that's not a lot of the tools that are already out there. They do this by default. You just have to go kind of dig into the settings and look. And then in the next 6 months, my hope, at least for most companies, is that they've removed all their unnecessary wireless networks. So what does that mean? Like, hey, if you have some old wireless networks that used to be used by this old system, take them down. If you don't need them, take them down. They're just causing a bunch of RF congestion, and they're a potential vector that somebody like me could get into them from. And then be able to identify if there's a rogue access point. I think that slide is off, but just be able to identify if there's a rogue access point present. What does that mean? If I put up a hotspot that just says like, hey, say my company is Escobar Enterprises, and if there's like Escobar Enterprises 2, if something like that pops up, have your devices configured in such a way that you get an alert that at least a new access point has been put up that matches similar to your names. Again, that'd be my recommendation in a perfect world. So now I kind of talked about this, but let's play a game. If you go over there, there is you go talk to the wireless village. There's multiple people actually walking around the conference that have a hotspot in their pocket. So you can kind of get your feet wet and trying to track down a rogue access point of your own somewhere in RSA. And I think they probably have some prizes for you. You have to go talk to them about that. So now I'll open it up to questions and yeah, go from there. Anybody have questions? You can just use the mic. If not, that's totally cool. Just gives me more time.
Yes, I'd like to hear about what you were going to talk about, the wireless medical device.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I guess that didn't make it in my revision of the slides. I apologize for that. I'm glad you brought that up. So medical devices, right? They are very low power, and so they can't transmit very much, or wireless signals very well. Sometimes it's embedded. Say it's a pacemaker, it's embedded in somebody. Those devices are typically made to be as cheap as possible so that they can be available to the masses. And because of that, a lot of times the security surrounding those, even though they're medical devices, is typically not that great. So I've seen, one time I was at a wedding and I saw somebody's Bluetooth insulin pump that had a default pairing code of 0000. I was on my iPhone and I could pair with their insulin pump. That is horrific. I could put her in a, in a diabetic coma just from my iPhone at a wedding, right? And so there's a ton of those devices. I've seen pacemakers where they operate on a similar band as, some other RF stuff. And so one of the things that we saw is, oh, we noticed when they go in that area of the hospital, there's some, crazy RF noise that, that affects how the meter reads the actual pacemaker. So that's a little bit. It looks like there's more questions, so I'll dig into it more. You can find me afterwards if you want.
There's a technology called white space internet. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no.
It's apparently something that doesn't use a provider, and it's look it up because I want to know your thoughts on it. But
yeah, I'll definitely look it up. And if so, I'm going to be over in the Wireless Village, so if we want to talk later, we absolutely can be. I haven't heard of that.
All right. You were talking about Fox Hunt, but I was just wondering if you have any recommendations for like projects for people who might have like a Raspberry Pi sitting at home that's just collecting dust.
Yeah, so this is exactly my Raspberry Pi right here. So if you go online, there's their default install or their default, oh my gosh, what do they call it? Operating system, Raspbian. You put Raspbian on there, and then you can start loading it up with all the types of wireless tools that are on there. So if you go over to the Wireless Village, we can talk about it. I have a full litany of things. But really put air dump the whole AirCrack suite. It's just apt-get update, apt-get install, the AirCrack suite. And then you're able to plug in an adapter like this, and basically you're off to the races. And then as you need more tools, you do more research, you can just basically start installing to kind of build up your repertoire of what you're able to do. But that's basically one of the things that I got started with. Like, hey, it's a cheap computer that I can play around with. So if you have one just sitting around, yeah, just absolutely just buy a little adapter for $10 and you're off to the races.
Sweet. Thank you.
Hey, attacking me. Hey, speaking of the $50, or speaking of Amazon, what's your favorite sub $50 antenna from Amazon?
Talk to us over there. We have a whole bunch of them.
Okay.
So I like the. I think it's just at $50. It's a Panda, like PAU09. I can give you the actual. That's just off the top of my head, so that may not be right, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. What I like about it, $50, 2 antennas that are external, so you can like mount it in all sorts of which ways. And it does both 2.4 and 5G, which is really nice. And it works out of the box. There's no crazy drivers or anything that you have to do on Linux to get it to go. It just right out of the box, you plug it in, works with the Raspberry Pi, works with Pen2, works with anything you can imagine.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? We good? One more?
You talked a fair bit about Wi-Fi and the threats, some of the actions that folks should take. How about Bluetooth or other frequencies and protocols that we ought to be thinking about, the threats and, kind of a game plan?
Yeah, so that's a very fair point. The reason I bring up Wi-Fi is because that's the one that most people, are very familiar with. It's the one that you use probably on a daily basis. There's other newer standards that are coming out for stuff like IoT devices like Zigbee and Z-Wave, and basically these are ways that low power, low energy devices they kind of like mesh communicate with one another, and they have all sorts of issues with them. I forget if it's Z-Wave or Zigbee, but one of them basically, anytime a device joins that network, it transmits that key in plain text, and after that the encryption is completely secure. The key doesn't get retransmitted, but if you're just sitting there listening for it and you're able to basically intercept that one key, then you can use that to join your own self to that network and control some of those devices. That's one of the known attacks that I do know about. But I mean, if you just start listing off types of wireless devices, they're all vulnerable to the things that we basically talked about. They're all vulnerable to jamming of some way or another. They're vulnerable to, say, replay attacks, which I already mentioned, and like for garage doors and like key fobs for like your car, they're vulnerable to like what's called a roll jam attack, which we can talk more about later if you want to meet me in the Wireless Village. But basically what I do is you click the lock button or the unlock button on your key, I jam that signal, but I capture your unlock request. You said, well, my car didn't unlock. So you click unlock again, and after you click unlock again, then I give your car the first key, and I take your second one, which basically preserves that second one so that I can use that later at another time and place. That's a little bit of like how like a roll jam attack works. But basically, the RF attacks, different wireless signals have different wireless properties, but the attacks are pretty uniform across the board. It really just matters what things are hooked up to it and what's most critical. Because I mean, you can have, if you knew the frequency of a temperature sensor in a nuclear power plant and were able to influence that, you could cause mass chaos, right? You could cause a bunch of devastation. But really, it just comes down to what it's used for. And then you can look for associated vulnerabilities in the protocol or just in the wireless spectrum in general.